Sorry, Madam Chair, no.
Can I deputize you?
Who's going to sue us?
Nope.
Good chance. No one's going to sue us.
We better start calling around.
Where's that vice chair? You should be showing leadership.
I'm going to see. Here we go. We have quorum. Okay, so welcome, Royce Fu and Natalie Paulsine, and it's the annual report for our committee and department for 2017. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with me is Natalie Paulsine, and we're going to go through quickly the highlights of the annual development report as relates to the official plan, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Paulsine.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Planning Committee. So the ADR monitors a range of demographic, housing, and economic variables, including several key aspects of the official plan. 2017 data show important trends that support the growth management policies in the OP. This presentation will cover population projections tracking, housing starts, intensification rate, employment, and index of commercial services around transit stations. The City of Ottawa's population estimate and the population projections in the official plan were very close, with a difference of 0.66%. Housing continues to increase. Housing starts were up 36.5% in 2017. The City of Ottawa has a good mix of unit types, with apartment units leading the way. Single detached units dropped to 29% share, dropping to the second largest housing type. In 2017, a 39.1% intensification share was achieved. The OP's 5-year intensification target is to average out the peaks and the dips, and the 2017 intensification share appears to be a dip. The 2017 share was lower than the OP's 5-year intensification target of 40%. However, 4 years remain in the target period. Employed residents in the City of Ottawa increased 0.6%, while the unemployment rate decreased 0.7% to sit at 5.6%. Based on feedback from last year, we separated out the government and knowledge sector into two sectors. In 2017, the knowledge sector had the largest number of employed residents. For a second time this year, the index of commercial services around transit stations was included in the ADR. This is a measurement of commercial services that are within walking distance of transit stations. In last year's report, this was titled Walk Score, but due to confusion, the name has changed. The average score of the stations analyzed was 74.6, which means most errands can be accomplished within transit station areas. Overall, in 2017, we saw population tracking close to OP projections, increase of employed residents and a decrease in the unemployment rate, an increase in housing starts with a balance of unit types, and that most errands can be accomplished within the transit station areas. Overall, the OP is succeeding in its growth management approach. Thank you.
I just, for some reason, automatically looked at you.
Yep.
Councillor Leeper. Thank you for your presentation. Councillor Leeper.
Yes, and thanks for the presentation. I'll probably be following up with some ward-specific stats. One question for you is immigration scenarios. Do you track what component of our growth is as a result of immigration and whether or not we're tracking to projections? Because I think it does have implications for housing types, for instance, along those lines.
So, Madam Chair, we track immigration in the back of the report through our tables 4 and 5 specifically. And these migration tables always lag about a year, so the reports are 2017, but the migration data, the latest is 2016. And it shows in 2016 there was actually quite a jump in the net migration overall. In terms of the projection components, though, what we do for the projections of the net migration is it's held constant over the projection period, and that's consistent with Stats Canada's approach for migration. However, significant changes in migration may require us to change our how we hold that constant level either higher or lower, depending on significant changes in migration. So in the next OP review, when we review our projections, in the new projection model, we'll have to take a closer look at migration rates and see whether we want to change our assumptions for a constant migration over our projection period.
Okay, but right now it's tracking to about what you thought immigration would be.
That is correct, except, as I said, last year we appear to have the high migration, and that's sort of in line with the federal government's approach to increasing migration to Canada over the years. If that trend continues, we would have to revise our projections to follow suit with the federal program.
If I recall, the last time I looked, StatsCan has high, medium, and low growth scenarios for immigration to Canada writ large. I don't know if they get into a more granular geography than that. You have the option, I guess, of moving to use StatsCan's higher growth projections if we need to change them.
So the medium, low, and high growth projections is not just migration; it's also births and death rates as well. So the high scenarios: high births, low deaths, high migration, for example, and those are the main components. You're correct; we do have options to sort of align ourselves with that, but the national rate filtered down to a city rate is a little bit different and complicated. So we tend to use a medium scenario approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, thanks. I'll be back in touch from the ward staff. Thank you.
Okay. As I was worried we wouldn't get here in time. Councillor Kadri?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. In terms of the growth, the intensification growth, is that broken out in terms of wards or specific, or is it broken out between suburban, urban, and core? The reason I'm asking the question, I just want to find out the intensification level. Are we meeting our targets in all three sections of the city?
So, Madam Chair, Table 13 identifies the residential intensification by each ward. In terms of the ward system versus the OP targets, it's not always one for one, because the official plan looks to have intensification, which by definition is the urban area less the greenfield areas. In the ward system, we have everything inside the green belts, outside the green belts, and the rural, meaning that those wards outside the green belts, part of them would be considered intensification, and part of them would also be greenfield. So the ward system and our OP targets aren't necessarily compatible, but overall we're seeing similar trends in terms of how intensification is playing out by ward versus our targets in the official plan for intensification.
Why would you not consider intensification and greenfield development?
Madam Chair, by definition, intensification can only occur within a built-up area, and that's why a greenfield would be greenfield, not intensification.
No, I understand that, but when the OP was approved a couple of years ago, the intensification target did change for the greenfield development areas, did it not?
Not for greenfield development. You might be thinking about the densities within greenfield areas. That is a separate. So densities is how many units you get in an area, as opposed to intensification is how many units overall within the city are built within a certain geography.
Mr. Willis, you have a comment?
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I could just supplement what Mr. Fu has just said. Well, the councillor's question comes at the issue of are we building in greenfield areas more compact than we used to, and through our Building Better suburban neighborhoods project, we definitely are having a lower land utilization, higher densities in suburban developments, and we're tracking that separately, but we don't have the tracking in the form that the councillor, I think, is asking for, but it's something we're looking at in the next official plan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I noticed actually, Mr. Willis, that the Boris O'Kane report today, and Councillor Hubley, this will be important to you, but remember we were talking about when we first started working on BBSS, you know this, Councillor Cadre, that the densities were approaching 50% in the new build, and it's 37 point something, which I was pleased to see that. Anything else? Well, thanks very much for coming out and waiting. It's a good report. So is that item received? I think we were asking to receive it, eh? Received? Received. Yeah, thanks. We're going to Nelson Street. Did anyone contact Councillor Fleury? No. Can somebody contact? Just let his office know that we're on 112 Nelson Street. So Andrew McCrate is with us, Doug James again. We have Matthew McElligott from FOTAN. We're not having a presentation, but we do have... where's my... questions of staff? Are you the only one with questions? Okay. So, Matthew, come on up and sit here just in case there are questions for you or if you feel the need to make a big presentation. So we'll go to questions from Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. It's somewhat the same question I had this morning when we were dealing with the 900 Albert. Councillor Fleury made note in his comments of drawdowns that he felt some discomfort around on the Section 37. Same question as this morning. What was your original uplift value calculation? And then what were the drawdown factors that brought it down to whatever the ultimate number was?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have the specific number in front of me, but I can tell you when we looked at the as-of-right zoning and the maximum GFA that would have been permitted compared to the proposed development in the gross floor area, the value uplift was somewhere in the range of just over 1.8 million. Okay. Then when you break that down in terms of discussion, it's important to look at a couple of things from a drawdown perspective. The two main drivers from a drawdown perspective, one was the existing zoning, light industrial zone permitted only up to 3 stories and certain size restrictions on the property. In view of a policy context, that was seen as zoning that wasn't quite matching what would have been reflective of as-of-right zoning from a policy perspective. So that contributes as a drawdown factor. Secondly, looking at the industrial zoning that was in place was very much reflective of the old warehouse building that was on the site. And when you look at the area context, which is largely a stable residential neighborhood in close proximity to Rideau and King Edward, changing from an industrial use, which had a list of uses that arguably were not very compatible within a residential context, and rezoning to a residential zone was also a significant drawdown. That was the basis from a drawdown perspective. Then when we got into negotiations with the applicant about what are we going to get out of this development from a Section 37 perspective, the main thing that came up was affordable housing as well as a monetary contribution. And as you see in the report, we negotiated to land on $300,000 contribution towards community improvements by way of traffic calming or contributions towards public spaces or parks, and 10% of the development would be affordable housing units. The other two items that you see in the list there, the small POPs in front of the site, as well as the 3-bedroom units, in my view, aren't really counting towards as much of a contribution, but we're using the Section 37 agreement as a vehicle to ensure that that happens versus trying to renegotiate its site plan. So as an overall basic, that was the framework from what we worked with from a drawdown perspective.
So what did the final number land on then for the cash value of Section 37?
It was the $300,000 and then the 10% of the development being affordable housing units.
So those affordable housing units, I guess, come out to 1.5 million plus the, sorry, I'm missing one. There's 1.8 million, you draw that down by 1.5 million to get to 300,000 for those improvements. It's a significant drawdown. And a lot of that seems to be associated with changing the zoning from something that the property owner didn't want to something the property owner wanted. Like, it was very much to their benefit to see it rezoned from industrial to residential. Why is that a drawdown when the beneficiary is largely the developer themselves?
In accordance with the Section 37 guidelines, Madam Chair, where you have zoning that is not directly consistent with the official plan designation, in this case the general urban area, and an area that's predominantly residential, whether the developer wants to do it or not, through the eyes of the policy context, that's looked at as a drawdown.
Because that money could be used in any other number of improvements in the neighborhood. Was there a risk that somebody was going to put an industrial building in there? I mean, it seems kind of inevitable that somebody would apply for and receive residential zoning there. Was the ward councillor involved in the discussion on the drawdowns?
Madam Chair, not specifically on the discussion of the drawdowns. Again, in accordance with the Section 37 guidelines, that discussion takes place between planning staff and the applicant.
Okay. Is there any notion, and I'm sorry Mr. O'Connor isn't here, but that strikes me as something that we may wish to address in the next term of council. I think there's some legitimate discussion to be had about how transparent Section 37 benefit drawdowns are. The councillor is not at the table, and thus the community is not at the table. I question how we apply a monetary value to drawing down Section 37 benefits for rezoning that is entirely to the benefit of the developer themselves. That's not a question that you can answer today, but I think we saw it raised this morning again, and it's something I know the Federation of Citizens Associations is looking at as well. Section 37 is intended to help us mitigate the impact of intensification in our already built-up neighborhoods. When there's uplift and there's growth, we need resources in order to be able to deal with that, and I'm not certain that the drawdowns are always associated with that. So that's something I think I'd like to have more of a conversation with, particularly next term of council. Turning to a better news story, I do congratulate Councillor Fleury, I'm sorry he's not here, on achieving the affordable housing units. I'm guessing that the conversation that you had with Councillor Fleury probably sounded like some of the conversation that we had around 979 Wellington Street. What is your intention or what is your thinking currently about how the mechanism by which we're going to achieve those affordable housing units? I think Councillor Fleury had spoken to turning a certain number of units over to a third party that would manage them, which is what I'm looking at 979 Wellington as well. But how far along the path are we to nailing down that mechanism?
Madam Chair, I can't speak to as the councillor phrased it, how far down that path are we to nailing that mechanism. That's a conversation that's going to happen with the housing branch at the time of executing this agreement. But what I can tell you from a point of comfort, if you look on page 18 in the specific condition that introduces the affordable housing requirements, which will be part of the Section 37 agreement, the second sentence was worked on very closely with the councillor and the housing branch, and it notes that a housing provider determined by the city shall administer these units. So it's going to have to go through a process where whoever ultimately owns these units or rents out this building, whether it's the developer or they're tied somehow to some sort of third-party entity, that's going to have to be approved through that agreement process so that there's control over what rents are happening and making sure that it's not changing over those years out of scope of the agreement. So the language is there, but we're not quite at implementation because that'll have to happen at that discussion.
Yeah, because my understanding is that 979, our legal and their legal, and it's not quite nailed down exactly what the paper needs to read like. So, and again, I'm looking at Mr. Willis. I think as we start to see more of these kinds of negotiated outcomes achieved, it would be good if we had some understanding of how we can sort of standardize those so that there's the elimination of some uncertainty around those. But again, I think that's probably at this point a discussion for the next term of council. Chair, thank you very much.
Thanks. Good questions. Thanks very much. Anyone else have anything? Would you like to speak, or are you happy with?
I'm very happy with Andrew's
answer. With Carrie?
Okay. No, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming out and for your work on this project with Councillor Fleury. So, Carrie, on 112 Nelson Street, the zoning bylaw amendment. Perfect. Thanks very much. Okay, so Councillor Fleury is not here for the zoning and bars and restaurants, so if he doesn't come, we'll just let it ride till the end of August. And then we have the temporary car shelters in residential zones, which Councillor Nussbaum held, I think. Did you? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, sorry, I'm just going to the part in the agenda. I just want to be clear that we're not tying staff's hands in the sense that the motion says that staff would report back to Planning Committee with a proposed zoning bylaw recommendation. And I just want to be clear that that means there could be a recommendation that no changes in the zoning bylaw are needed. So I just want to make sure that that option is available to staff if they deem on review that things are fine the way they are. But if that's understood, then nothing more to say.
Leanne, is that you?
Madam Chair, that's absolutely understood. Thank you for the clarification, Councillor.
Okay. So carried? Okay, so now we are on to the item that was walked on to the and approved by us to the agenda, and that's the great news this morning. And I'm going to give the show over to Councillor Blake.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As was announced this morning by the Mayor, Broccolini Construction has entered into an agreement with Amazon to build their fifth fulfillment center in the Boundary Road Rural Industrial Park in Carlsbad Springs. As part of that process and in discussion with the City of Ottawa, Broccolini is making millions of dollars of investment in public infrastructure, including the extension of water services, the extension of natural gas, the extension of hydro, and over $1 million worth of road improvements. And that will benefit local residents and local businesses in the industrial park who will be able to tap into that extension of services. As part of the discussions around this, Broccolini has asked if it would be possible to defer the payment of DCs until the facility is complete, as opposed to at the beginning of the process, which is typically our practice. And that deferment is effectively what this motion calls for, as well as waiving the interest on that deferment. This is something that is supported by staff because of the investment in public infrastructure and the fact that at the end of the day the city will still be receiving 100% of the development charges it would normally receive. And so just to provide some additional context, in an official plan amendment in 2015, the city brought the industrial park into the public service area to allow for the Carlsbad trickle feed system to be extended into the area. And in 2016, these lands were identified by our Economic Development Branch as an area of opportunity as part of that report that Council received and approved in 2016. And so this is a site that we've been trying to develop for quite a long time. It is an expensive site to develop because of the location of hydro and gas and water, and as a result, I think it's very appropriate that we provide some opportunity to defer, not eliminate those upfront costs. So the motion reads, therefore be resolved that Planning Committee recommend that Council approve, 1, the deferral of the municipal portion of the DCs until the project is completed, or for 18 months, whichever is lesser, and 2, that in lieu of Broccolini covering all costs associated with bringing services to the site, and in particular the extension of Carlsbad Springs trickle feed line, which will be assumed as municipal infrastructure upon completion, the roadway modifications be exempt from paying the interest applied to the deferral of the payment of the DCs, and 3, that Broccolini enter into an agreement to the satisfaction of the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development and the City Solicitor, setting out details for the deferral of payment of DCs and the waiver of interest charges subject to Broccolini constructing and paying for the extension of water services to the site and implementing the roadway modifications with such agreement to be registered if permitted under the Land Titles Act. And be it further resolved that Planning Committee recommend Council waive the notice required under subsection 29.3 and 34.1 of the Procedure Bylaw 2016-377 to consider this motion at its meeting on 11 July 2018, as the next Council meeting is at the end of August, and delaying the consideration of this motion would significantly delay the construction of the facility. Those are the call notes. I'm happy to answer any questions or get into any details, and I understand Mr. Schmidt is here to get into any details on staff side as well.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Schmidt, did you want to add anything?
Madam Chairman, Madam Chair, I think the Councillor very succinctly summarized sort of what the essence of the motion is. The only point that I would make is that the issue of deferral of payment is something that is not uncommon practice. The real issue is the waiving of the interest charge. So that's really the essence of it. And the primary basis for that, as the Councillor indicated, is it's a significant investment that's required in terms of extension of infrastructure and service, in particular municipal services, and it's the ability to allow Broccolini to move forward and not have as part of their overall pro forma that additional, so it's the exchange of providing that additional infrastructure really as a catalyst to really get this employment area up and running, which, as the Councillor indicated, has been on the books for quite some time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Nussbaum, questions? Councillor Luper, questions?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a question to staff. Given that staff say they support this motion, I'm just trying to understand. So the policy rationale for waiving the interest is that the infrastructure that was put on is expensive. Is that?
Madam Chair, there is multi-million dollars worth of infrastructure investment coming in this area, some of which is city infrastructure with respect to water. There's also extension of private infrastructure in hydro utilities, natural gas, and the like. This area was established through a planning process to be a significant employment area on the east end of the city, and by having this infrastructure laid in place, the other users will be able to take advantage of that, and it'll make the area more marketable for other employment uses.
And so is that an indication that at any time that an applicant is building significant infrastructure paid for through development charges, that staff would look favorably upon a similar application to waive the interest in this kind of deferral process? So is that fair to say that under similar circumstances in a different part of the city, staff would look favorably upon such an application?
Madam Chair, just to be perfectly clear, Broccolini will be paying their development charges just 1 year later than they would otherwise have paid them.
No, I'm talking about the interest charges.
No, certainly if we found another situation where we had an area that had been planned for some time for economic development and had no movement on it, and one player could advance infrastructure come into the area, I think we would bring this forward to committee on a case-by-case basis, ultimately with committee having final decision.
And what is staff's understanding, if, let's say, council were to refuse this exemption of the interest charges, what would be the consequence of that? Do you think this project wouldn't happen?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure about the details of the arrangements between Broccolini and their tenant, but we are very well aware that this was a key element of the discussions that were happening. So whether or not there's something that's wrapped up in that agreement, should this not go forward, I can't comment on that. That's a private arrangement between those two parties.
So, and just so that I'm clear, this is going to be space that Amazon is going to occupy, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I looked at the Q1 results of Amazon, $51 billion in sales, $1.6 billion in profit. That was Q1 of 2018, a doubling of profit year over year from the previous year. So it's staff's view that this exemption of the interest charge is critical to ensure this project succeeds.
Madam Chair, the Council is looking at the tenant's view of the world, and I would recommend that Council consider the landlord and landowner's view of the world. A local construction company trying to attract an international user to a site in competition with other communities. There were other Eastern Ontario municipalities that desperately wanted this opportunity. So our local landowner managed to find a formula to attract Amazon to bring 600 jobs to the Ottawa area, and that is the rationale for this. And we can't assume what the outcome of the process would be, but I would ask Council to think about it from the perspective of the local landowner.
And so, but just to go back to the previous point, so the idea is an agreement has been crafted, and now through Councillor Gray's motion, we want to try and get Council agreement on what we think was contained in this agreement, and we think that this $800,000 is critical to making this project happen. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Leeper. Anyone else? Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. I don't have the motion in front of me, but how much is the final amount of that interest that would be waived?
It's an estimate at this point in time because the calculation of development charges happens at the building permit stage, but for a 12-month waiver, it's about $800,000, give or take.
So that's just the interest on it?
That's just the interest. That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, so that's not an insignificant amount when we're talking about city projects. I'll throw one more number into Councillor Nussbaum's mix there, which is CapEx in Q1 2018. So that's the amount that they're spending on acquiring leases and building facilities was $21 billion, just in CapEx alone. I don't understand why, if Broccolini is going to struggle to carry this, thank you very much, carry this development charge, they don't turn to their tenant, who clearly have the financial wherewithal to pay. That $800,000 in interest probably is not a lot to Amazon, but I think to the residents of Ottawa, that represents a significant number of projects that don't get done. Where is that funded? That $800,000, which where would that normally go into?
Madam Chair.
Which DC? Affordable housing. Yeah.
Madam Chair, if the developer were able to pay the bill today, there would be no interest charge and no revenue. But if they were so we're not foregoing a revenue, Madam Chair, that we would otherwise get. We're getting the chance to ensure we actually get that revenue.
Yep. But but if they were to defer it for that year and then pay the $800,000 in interest, that would go into the various DC reserves according to the proportions outlined in the bylaw.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Hubley.
No, Mr. Willis made my point for me that the revenue is not available if Councillor Blais and the Mayor's office hadn't got these 600 new jobs coming into the area and this new development. That money was not available. So for Councillor Leeper to suggest that certain projects wouldn't go forward and people would be disadvantaged because of this is quite unfair to the work of Councillor Blais and the Mayor.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is a moot point because there wouldn't even be, if there wasn't there wouldn't be an application, there wouldn't be a development, there wouldn't be any investment. So, but I mean, you know, it is let's face it, it's not like you had time to really think about it ahead of time. So I appreciate the fact you're asking questions. Anybody else? No. So on the item, is it carried?
No. Dissent.
Dissent. I think that's a common pattern today. Same too. Okay. Yeah, but you know, if it had gone to, I can think of 3 other places right now, Cornwall, Brockville, Prescott, you know, who would have been sorry then? I know I would be. So let me just see where we are, because other than the fact we're at the end.
So we're going to defer the story?
Yeah, I already said that. Yeah. So the flurry thing just continues to float till the end of August now. That's okay. I don't know. Well, he's been here. He was here this morning. Councillor Fleury was here this morning, and he left because. So we have no other business. Any inquiries? Yeah, I'm really surprised, you know, because usually in an election year, just suggesting that there are tons of inquiries, and you guys are kind of surprising me a lot. I think you're missing the boat on it. Just saying. So no inquiries. The next meeting is into, drum roll, August the 28th. Planning Committee gets a break. And
Full agenda.
And it's a big agenda. What a surprise. So we're, and before that you have AMO, so thank you. We're adjourned.